Illinois Stories is brought to you by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, Illinois Arts Council Agency, and by the support of viewers like you. Thank you.
Hello, welcome to Illinois Stories. I'm Mark McDonald in Quincy at Temple Bnai Shalom, one of the fixtures of faith in Quincy. This building's been here and this congregation has been here since 1869. And sadly, this congregation has shrunk to the point that by May 18th of this year, they will desanctify this temple. Well, that's kind of a long and winding road, Carla.
It's the yellow brick road.
Yeah. This is, I would call this a choir loft, but it's a balcony.
It's a balcony.
A balcony,
yes.
Okay. And we're here first because this is where you get a really good look.
This is one of the best views of the entire sanctuary of
and
Temple
you can
Bnai
see the
Shalom.
windows from here, and
Yes.
you can see the chandeliers. Let's start by just taking an overview of this. A lot of people have never been in a temple.
That's right.
The seating looks very much like any other church, but the elevated area at the front of the church is called a what?
A bima.
Bima,
Yes.
okay. And that includes everything that's on, is that called an altar?
You could call it an altar, that's just fine.
Okay.
It's more like a lectern, and on that kind of high table we would lay the Torah that we read on most Friday nights, occasionally on a Saturday, and always on our special high holy days.
Now behind that lectern, there's an area that has a curtain across it. What's that called?
I call that the Ark, and the Ark holds our Torahs, and our congregation is pretty blessed because we have 4 of the Torah scrolls, and 2 come from the temple that was in Hannibal, Missouri. When they joined our congregation in 1970 or so, we took over their Torah scrolls.
And we can look at those? Can you show those to us?
Sure,
Okay, all right.
we'll take a look at those.
Now also down there is interest, right above the curtain we were talking about, there's a reddish light.
Yes.
And that's significant, isn't it?
So we call that the Ner Tamid, and that light should always be burning. And its significance is that God is in the presence of this building. And it's very meaningful for every temple that there is, whether it's Reform or Orthodox or Conservative, there will always be a Ner Tamid over the place that they hold their Torahs.
You can't get into this building, especially at this time of day. We're here in mid-morning.
Yes.
And the sunlight is streaming through these beautiful stained glass windows.
Yes, it is.
And as you can see, there are the straight-lined windows, and
Yes.
there are the round windows, which
Yes.
I rarely see round stained glass windows.
Yes. I was saying earlier that a lot of thought must have gone into the construction of this building, because at the time, 1869, 1870, of course there would not have been electric this far east of the river. So what you're looking at are the original gas chandeliers and the original gas sconces along the walls that were lit probably by somebody who wasn't Jewish. Somebody would have come in earlier to light them. And eventually, of course, they were converted into electric.
Yeah, but those go back just as old as the church.
They are original.
They are beautiful.
Yes, they really are.
And the stained glass that you've been very fortunate, those have all had lasted through all these years.
Yes, all but one.
Yeah, all but one. And
Yes.
I take it it's this one back here, right?
It's this one, yes. There is a bit of history to our temple, and in 1945, a nice old tornado came through town
man.
and took off one of the turrets, and of course blew out this window, and it's been replaced with the one that you see today, and it says Bnai Sholom Temple.
Yeah. This isn't original to the building, but this has been here a long time. Organ. Huh?
To my knowledge, this was brought in. It was the custom in Reformed Judaism to be able to have an organ accompany the musicians or the choir. Not all congregations would have a choir, but the one that I grew up in Skokie, Illinois, had an organ and a choir master, and so on. And we had a very special program at one time, and an area organist was kind enough to convert this from the bellows that it was once upon a time and electrified it. So we know that it's still functioning, but we just don't use it in our services anymore.
Can you turn it on for us?
I will. I'd be happy to.
There used to be a little boy that used to operate the bellows.
That's
that
the
was
story.
his job. Huh?
That was the story. There was a little boy that put a lot of effort when the organist had to do some of the playing. And I do want to point out, though, that while the music would have been here above the Burdett logo, it was possible for them to see what the rabbi was doing and to be cued into when the choir was going to be singing. So the choir would have been up front and the organ would have been back here. So let me give this a whirl.
There's the electrification, huh? Okay.
Yes.
So it's getting there.
Yes.
Sure enough. Sure enough. And it's got the stops.
Yes, it
You know,
has
and they
the
still
stops.
work, don't they?
Yes.
Yeah.
They all work.
Sure is a noisy thing.
It's in tune.
Okay, turn that off. It's too noisy for us.
Yes, it is too
There it
noisy.
goes.
And it has
Easy,
to,
boy,
easy,
easy, okay.
easy. But yeah, this is quite something, and I think this will be available if somebody needs an organ somewhere. This
Oh,
would be,
I'm sure this will find a home
this
easily.
hopefully will
Yeah.
have a very, very
Just
good
for its
home.
historic value, if nothing else.
Yes, and to my knowledge, this is one of the oldest ones that is original to the city of Quincy.
Yeah. When this temple was 100 years old in
Yes.
1969.
That's right.
There was an event.
Yes.
And at that event, they took the cornerstone out and removed a time capsule, right?
Yes, that's right.
And then they put it back in, and they put in some items that you all are going to remove here before you
Before too long.
desanctify the
That's
church.
right.
But I want to go out and take a look at that cornerstone, and then
Yes.
we can see the contents of what you all found in 1969.
That would be great.
All right? Well, Carla, we were discussing the fact that in 1969, you know, there was this big event, right? Okay,
Yes.
the church, the building was 100 years old.
It was, it's centennial.
And in honor of that, the cornerstone here was removed because
Yes.
there was a time capsule. But it's interesting because this cornerstone, you can see that in 150 some years, this has really aged. You
It's
can
aged a
barely
lot.
read it anymore.
Yes, but there was quite a to-do, and I've seen some photos of the event, and they had the entire corner completely removed. They had a local mason come and take out all of the brick, and they put the cornerstone. This is limestone. It hasn't held up very well, but this says that it was erected by KK Congregation Bnai Sholom, and then the dates, and probably 1869, 1870, I guess, in the ballpark.
Would have been when it was completed.
Yes,
70,
that's right.
And you can see Quincy Preserves here has recognized it as a
Yes.
genuinely old Quincy building.
Yes, and also just to let you know, last year the State of Illinois Historical Society also honored us as being a congregation over 150 years old.
Neat.
Yes.
Neat. Now, back in 1969, they took the items out of
Yes,
this.
they did.
They crammed a lot in there, didn't they?
Yes, they did.
Let's go take a look at what
We
they
shall.
found after
Okay,
you.
thank you. Yeah.
Carla, there's a display case as you walk into I call it a sanctuary. I'm
It's
not
a
sure what
sanctuary, yes.
Here, and every item in here was in the time capsule.
Yes,
right?
it was,
They
yes.
crammed a lot in there. I mean, look, there's the capsule itself.
Yes.
And that's what was dug out of the cornerstone.
Yes.
And all of these items were in there, and most of them very, very good condition. Some of them a little rough, but
Yes. Well, what's amazing to me is that we have so many different newspapers of the day and the time, and they're in different languages. So this congregation probably spoke a lot of German, and we have them in English and German and Hebrew. And then what I also find very fascinating are the types of coinage, but in paper form. So on top to our front left here is a 50-cent note, third issue. And we were also very lucky because the people that donated this display case had the wisdom to write down everything that was in the content of that time capsule.
and that's right in the middle
That's
here.
in the middle.
And they got that, of course, they knew what was in there because they opened it, but this was also in there, and this is the original list
Yes,
of the
it is.
contents, and
Yes.
you can read some of it you can still make out.
I'll let you do that.
Yeah, no, I'm not going to try. I'm going to try it just live. But
Yeah.
a list of city council officers.
Yes, that's correct.
And things like that were like public Quincy public knowledge.
Who
kinds
the
of
who the
things.
mayor was, who the
Yeah.
governor was of the state
Yeah.
of Illinois at that time, And it was quite a big to-do when that capsule was opened.
I'll bet it was. And you're going to open it again here pretty soon, and it's going to be interesting. Does anybody have a list of what's in there? Or is it going to be a total surprise? It'll be a total surprise.
I wasn't here, so it's going to be a surprise,
Oh,
yes.
good.
Yes.
That'll be great.
I think it's something very special, though, from 1969.
Yeah. Another historic item that you have here that we're going to take a look at is your original seating chart.
Yes.
And this is from 1870 when and interestingly, people, they got to sit where they wanted based, I guess, on how well they supported the church.
Possibly.
Let's go take a look at
Sure.
that. Carla, you walk in the main doors, and one of the first things you see is this list.
Yes.
It's the seating chart that we talked about, and it's original from when the first, when the first services would have taken place.
The first congregation would have been in their seats at that time, and perhaps it was they were given an idea of where they were going to sit based on the amount of money they could have donated to the structure of this very fine building. And and I'm amused by it. But one of the things that I noticed when I first came here is that we, at the time, had a member whose name is on here. His forefather was one of the earliest members of this congregation, Hal Jackson's ancestor, and his name is still on there. And Hal recently passed, so that's the last of the names of the people that that were affiliated with the original opening of this congregation.
At the time that this temple was opened, was there another temple in Quincy?
There was one that was here beforehand. It was a wooden structure located around 6th and Main. We know that because of the newspaper accounts. And we also know that it was a very joyous event that when they opened this building, the Torahs from that structure were held by the rabbis and maybe the president of the congregation and danced through the streets. I will never forget that phrase. The Torahs were danced through the streets, through the front doors, which were not glass, but whatever, they probably wood structure. And it was always a joyous occasion when a new building could be opened, a new house of worship. And this was quite something for Quincy because of the involvement of the congregation, certainly, through the First World War and again through the Second World War.
Many of us have never seen a Torah.
No.
And you have 4.
Yes, we do.
In the bima, on the bima?
In the Ark.
In the Ark, on the bima.
Yes.
Okay. Would you show those to us?
I'd be happy
to.
All right. So we're up at our Ark, and I'm going to open this up and let your viewers see that we call it Torah heavy. We're so lucky that we have 4 Torahs at the moment. We have 2 that belong to Temple Bnai Shalom, and we also have 2 that belonged to the temple in Hannibal, Missouri. And again, they joined us in 1970. So we have similar covers. We have a contemporary cover, but there are similar things that you'd find here, but they're all different. Each Torah cover is different, and it would be the same in any congregation that was of the Jewish faith. Not one Torah cover would be the same anywhere. We call these a yad. It means hand in Hebrew. And I'm going to take one of these out, and then we can take a look at one. And I'll let you hold this one.
I can hold it?
You get to hold one. And you're going to hold it like a baby, so over your left shoulder. And your right hand comes down below. And there you are. And now you're holding a Torah, and I'll let you bring it up.
Holding thousands of years of history is at the moment. Okay. Now, just lay it down like a baby.
Like a baby.
Okay.
And I will do something similar to Mike. I'm going to chant one of our prayers that we do before we read the Torah, and I'll give it a go.
Okay.
So this is the blessing of the Torah that we recite before we read the temple. And it goes like this. Baruch hu et Adonai hamidvorach. Baruch Adonai hamvorach le'olam vo'ed. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech ha'olam. Asher bachar banu mikol ha'amin. V'natan lanu et Torah tov. Baruch atah Adonai nosein ha'torah. And the last 2 words you heard was ha-Torah, the Torah. So with this, we can undress it. And I'll let you take off the silver
Okay.
pointer, which
The
we call a
hand.
yad. And then you can put that on top of the lectern.
Just here.
And I'm going to hold this so that you can pull this directly off. Just take that cover and pull towards you. Wonderful. And you can lay that there as well. And so we are looking at a Torah scroll. And I showed you 4 Torahs altogether. This is one of the 4 that we have. Everything in this Torah is going to be exactly the same, but a different calligrapher for the other 3 rather. And so we will.
So the words are exactly the same.
The
The
words,
text is the same.
the words in the text are exactly the same, and they are the 5 books of Moses, no more and no less. And this is sheepskin, and we can touch this part of it. But once we unroll the scrolls, and this is what it will look like.
You
This
don't
is,
touch the inside.
I
You touch
don't,
only
because
the outside.
because we have oils on our finger. And Mark, if you'd hold the bottom
I
of
sure
this
will.
scroll, I'm going to reach across and get the yad. And the yad is worn by placing it over one's hand. And I'm going to hold my finger in the same manner as the yad. This one happens to be silver. And then some people might find it more comfortable to hold it more like a style. But anyway, in Judaism, we start at the upper right and we read from right to left. And then we go down. And so my fingers, nor of the rabbis, nor of our bar or bat mitzvahs, none of them will ever touch this. And if I can do a quick comparison, when you look at this Hebrew, there are no vowels whatsoever. And what I was chanting has the Hebrew script with its vowels.
And that would be this line here.
That's the transliteration. We're looking at the dots and the dashes below each of the letters. And the children who prepare for their bar or bat mitzvah would get something like this script. And they would also get in modern day a recording of it that they can listen to in their earphones. But when they come up here, they're going to either read or they're going to do the chanting in what we call trope. So trope is a rhythmical reading of this Hebrew. And I want to open this just a bit more so that your viewers can see, let me roll this a bit, that these sheets of sheepskin are all hand bound. They're hand bound in all the way up and down each sheet. And I know it'll sound a little amusing, but let's say the calligrapher, who would be a rabbi, made one error, then that's not very good, and that sheet would have to be pitched. So this is quite something. And then there are also no periods, there are no numbers. So in a prayer book, let's say for a Catholic service, you might find the book of John, perhaps, lines 1 through 3. A rabbi would have to study this for years to know where the equivalent would be for the 5 books of Moses, Exodus, Deuteronomy, Genesis, and so on. So I find this very fascinating. And when we start a new book, there'll be a much bigger space. So these are different phrases and sayings and so on, prayers and part. But since we start from the right and go to the left, this particular Torah is near the end of the 5th book of Moses. And so when we close it, all we have to do is very carefully go together, and we bring them together, and we're set for closing and for the next week.
Mike, Saul, these are kind of bittersweet times, aren't they?
They certainly are.
Yeah. How long have you been a member of this
I have
congregation?
been coming here for about 37 years.
Is that right?
Right.
And you have the distinction of being one of the musicians.
Well, I am
this
the
congregation.
music department.
You're the music department.
I'm called a cantorial soloist. In larger congregations, you'll have an ordained cantor who can do pretty much everything a rabbi does. But I'm a retired music educator, so I have had singing in my background. So they found that out early, and I've been doing this for about 35 years.
Is music important in the Reform Judaism?
It's important in all of Judaism, just as important in a church setting. We basically, as I might have mentioned, music is the thing that transcends when words aren't enough.
And when music is used, is it used in the same way every Friday night? Are there times when the music changes for holy days? Or
The High Holy Days has its own separate musical liturgy, in addition to the same things we might sing on Friday night for services.
Okay, so I'm going to ask you to give our audience a sample of what might happen, maybe on a regular Friday night, and also maybe on a holy day. Okay?
Sure.
Now, you wouldn't be dressed like you're dressed right now.
I'd be wearing a suit.
Okay, suit and tie.
Right.
Okay, like a bit like if you were
Just
going to a business
exactly,
meeting.
right.
Okay. And what about would your head be covered?
Yeah, I'd be wearing one of these. It's called a yarmulke or kippah.
Yeah. Okay.
Head
okay.
covering.
Most of us have heard yarmulke, so okay.
Right.
And this is no different in the Reform Judaism. The yarmulke is typically worn, or
Well, it depends on the particular Reform congregation. We all wear them, but it's optional in Reform.
Okay. What else would you wear?
I would wear one of these. It's called a talit, or a prayer shawl. And both of these are just items that show our constant devotion to God.
Okay, and this would go over your suit,
Right.
suit and tie. Okay.
Right.
Then you would be asked to at the beginning of the service to do something. I don't know.
One of the earliest things we do is called the Baruch Hu, which is the blessed or the call to worship.
Okay, and show us what that is.
Baruch Hu et Adonai hamevorach, Baruch Adonai hamevorach leolam vaed.
Wow, that got my attention. What did you just say?
I said, praise God to whom all praise is due. Praise God to whom all praise is due forever and ever.
Okay. Now, there are also instruments used, very traditional instruments.
Well,
and you have three of them set
High
up.
Holy Days, we have these things called, it's called a shofar, S-H-O-F-A-R. And what these used to live on animals. They're ram's horns. And there's many different designs, just depending on how big the ram is. There's only one of these that I can get a decent sound out of. As a brass player, this works for me. And basically, the shofar is a call to worship.
Okay. And isn't that what you just sang? Was that a call to worship?
That was a call to worship as well.
Okay. Okay.
So this is played at the High Holy Days, and we have a whole service for the blowing of the shofar, and it's repeated 3 times. And here is just a sample of what that might sound like. Here's the long blast.
You have some lungs. Of course, you are a musician, right? You play a horn.
I have a lot of hot air, yes.
A lot of hot air. And that would be the call to worship.
Right.
Okay, so everybody would hear that, they would know that that's the beginning of the service. And
Well,
that's on Yom, did you say Rosh Hashanah?
Rosh Hashanah. Okay. And it's actually, that happens actually into the service, in the middle of the service. It's just an ancient tradition that we carry on forever and ever.
Now, this is going to be difficult for you because when this is desanctified, is this congregation just going to go away, or are you going to have? Where will you attend?
Well,
services?
the congregation is really the people. This is just a building, and it's nice that we have this, but we're very, very small. This is a very large building, and unfortunately, we don't have enough people to fund it, and there's so much that needs to be done to it that it would be kind of a loss of money. So I think the people will still continue. We'll just have to worship in a different place.
You'll have to find. Will you still be chanting
yes.
and blowing this
as long as
horn?
I've got, as long as I'm breathing, I'm doing this.
Okay. Thank you, Mike.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Raj, you have the distinction of being the oldest member of the congregation.
That's right.
Are you proud of that?
I have no feeling one way or the other.
You just happen to be the oldest, right?
right.
Well, I think they're kind of proud of you because you and your husband were, God love him, he passed away a couple of years ago, but you were members of this congregation for many, many, many years.
That's right.
Weren't you? Tell me about how you came to Quincy and how you found this congregation.
Well, my husband was a physician. He trained in New York in dermatology under Dr. Marion Sulzberger, who was the most prominent dermatologist at that time. Dr. Hilliard Shear was here, who had also trained at the same place. And Dr. Shear contacted Dr. Sulzberger and said, would one of your new men, when they're finished, want to come out here? So that's how we came out, and we liked it. We looked at other places, but we liked Quincy best.
That's a big change going from Brooklyn to Quincy, isn't it?
Well, I looked at Santa Fe, New Mexico, so this looked good.
That's a big change too. That's even bigger. Back in 1955, Santa Fe would have been just a little place in the middle of nowhere, wouldn't it? Yeah.
Kind of, yeah.
So one of the things you were looking for, I guess, was a temple, right?
Very important to us because we had 3 little girls. The oldest was 6 and the youngest was 9 months. And we wanted a Jewish education for our children. And this sounded good. And it was good. It was good in those years, but it's changed.
Yeah, well, I think we've talked about this, but young people move away for careers and to raise families, and smaller cities like Quincy don't seem very appealing to young families
That's
anymore.
exactly right. That's
so it's not just the
exactly right.
it's not just the Jewish population. It's every population that
Right.
loses young people.
A lot of my Gentile friends say the same thing happens in their churches.
So what we end up with here is the pews with people who are just getting older and older and older. Not quite as old as you, but almost.
But they'll get there.
Yeah, but they'll get there. Yeah, God willing, they'll get there. But it was a great place to raise a family, huh?
It was very good.
What was it like on a Friday night back in the 50s?
Well, we would all come and we would do our prayers, and then we would go downstairs and we would have what's called an Onik Shabbat, which was coffee and tea and desserts. And so we'd mingle, and it was friendly. It was very nice.
It was not just worship; it was social too.
It was social too, very much.
And you found the congregation to be just right up to what you were looking for. Huh?
Very nice, yes.
That was an interesting time in history, because in 1955, when you and your husband moved, that was not very long after World War II, and there were a lot of new people coming into this country.
Yeah, right. Well, this congregation had German and Eastern European refugees, and I don't know how they got here, but different ways, you know, and mostly physicians and merchants. That's exactly what they were here. And very nice people.
This is a big temple, but I guess back in the 50s and 60s it was nearly full sometimes, huh?
Only for bar mitzvahs and confirmations.
Yeah.
Otherwise it was never full.
They built in optimistically, huh?
Right.
Well, what will you do now when this is desanctified? Do you know where you'll attend services?
Well, I know that they're talking with some of the churches, and we will probably move over to one of them, and we'll continue. We don't have many people, but we have people who are interested in coming, and we will continue.
Your faith is important to you, isn't it?
Very.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Roz.
You're very welcome.
On May 17th, the last of the services will take place at this temple, and then on May 18th, the desanctification ceremony will take place, and then this congregation will be looking for another place to worship, and this building likely goes up for sale. With another Illinois story in Quincy, I'm Mark McDonald. Thanks for watching.
Illinois Stories is brought to you by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, Illinois Arts Council Agency, and by the support of viewers like you. Thank you.